Greetings, Raise community, and welcome to today's episode. I'm excited to host Kristin Sorenson, who serves as Vice President of Development at the West Point Association of Graduates. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, Brent. It's great to be with you.
Well, it has been a while since we properly caught up, so we were excited to have this catalyst to do so. And I want to start this episode, as I have with many recent episodes, by asking Kristin more about her own career path and higher education journey in particular. So tell me, Kristin, about who you were junior year of high school. What was that Kristin into? Where was she? And what led her to Kenyon College to study a bunch of languages?
Let's see. That could be a very complex question, but I'll try to simplify. So junior in high school, I actually was really interested in studying comparative religion. I went to a school outside of Boston where the headmaster was a reverend, and he taught a number of courses on comparative religion that were just mind-blowing. And
I asked which school?
Noble and Greeno,
Okay.
Nobles. It's in Dedham, Massachusetts.
Oh, very well. Lots
well.
of friends there, including George Malley. I don't know if you've met George.
Yeah, I do know who George is. Yeah. In any event, he was just a complete inspiration, and at a time in my life where, and I think not unlike most people, kind of grappling with who I was and who I wanted to be. Just studying the human condition was something that was really meaningful to me. And when I looked to colleges, actually Kenyon jumped out, Kenyon College in Ohio, Gambier, Ohio, as a place that would be really interesting next step, given the fact that they had an incredible English department, but also a really amazing comparative religion department. So with that in mind, and again, just kind of exploring what is it to be human, what are the big questions, how does one make sense of those, and how do you make meaning in your life as an adult, I ended up at Kenyon. And I think
I just have to say, those are some deep thoughts for a 16-year-old. And so that is really a testament to that experience at Nobles.
Well, again, his name was Ted Gleason, Reverend Ted Gleason, and he was really remarkable. And I think many of us at Nobles were really impacted by him in ways that were very profound. But in any event, after I graduated from Kenyon, I went back to see him. He was a mentor. And I said, Mr. Gleason, what do I do with this comparative religion major? What do you think might make sense for me? And he said, Kristin, fundraising is really something that you should look at. And I was gobsmacked. I had not ever considered fundraising, and actually promptly did everything but that. So for about 5 years or 6 years, I explored a whole host of things, including working for Christie's, the auction gallery in New York, for a couple of years in contemporary and modern paintings, impressionist paintings. I worked in the collectibles department, all very heady stuff, and started to feel at some point that I, was longing for something a little bit more meaningful. I had a brief stint working for a foundation called the Simon Bolivar Foundation, which was looking to help emerging rural populations in Latin America elevate their community building skills. And I did spend a little time working as the executive director there, again, trying to look for something purposeful. That strangely led into working in retail in Spain. So I spent a couple of years doing that, and that led to management consulting. So I ended up working for
nothing that you've shared so far would have made me think, and that led to management consulting. So that's a little bit of a curveball. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Not just management consulting, but with BCG, which is one of the elite firms. Hard job to get.
Yeah, it was, I was the client in Spain. So I worked for a big department store chain called Galerías Preciados. And I was on the end of implementation of a BCG strategy. So there was a BCG team at Galerías Preciados at the time. And I was on, as I said, implementation side in visual merchandising. So I was in charge of a team of Spaniards, and we went across the country implementing this much more integrated kind of lifestyle marketing strategy that BCG had come up with. So when that project ended, BCG offered me a position in Boston, and I actually joined their retail group and moved back to Boston, and then ended up in LA with them. And finally, actually found myself being approached to work for a big project that they had won, working with, I believe it was Nissan. And my job was going to be to travel around Texas to different car dealerships and figure out how to do just-in-time delivery of cars of particular colors and models. And I literally went back to my desk and just said, I have wandered way too far from what matters to me. And I actually shortly thereafter quit and moved back to the Boston area where I'm from, and started looking around. And by that time was willing to explore what my mentor had offered me all along, and actually ended up networking my way into a conversation with Harvard, and ultimately had my first job in fundraising with the principal gifts department at Harvard in the Central Development Office. So that's the journey.
I mean, I've done 150 few of these episodes, and that journey definitely stands out. What was it like when you think about the first week, first month on the job at Harvard? What are you actually given? What material did you have to work with? How much of it was go jump in the deep end versus in-depth training? Just take me back to really that onboarding process.
That's a great question. So this was, roughly 30 years ago. So fundraising was different, and fundraising is actually quite different at places like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, I think. But certainly at the time, I think what Harvard's always excelled at is relationship building. And what we were doing at the time was definitely person specific. It was, we had a pool of, I guess, roughly, I'm going to say 250, 300 people who had a net worth of over $5 million. And our job was I worked for another mentor of mine, Bill Boardman, who was the head of principal giving. And with a whole host of really incredible people at Harvard at the time, Tom Reardon, his brother Jack, Bill Boardman, and his brother, who was in the annual giving side. But Bill was my boss. And again, we were starting something new. The whole notion of principal giving was not something that the field had thought about before. And we're charged with thinking about Harvard University as a whole, and these high net worth individuals as assets for the institution as a whole. And our job was to help the president of Harvard, who at the time was Neil Rudenstein, build personal relationships with as many of these people as possible and represent the interests of often multiple schools to these individuals, so that they weren't being bombarded by lots of people from different directions, that it was a centralized ask, and that it was coming from the head of the institution. So in the first I'd say first 6 months, there wasn't a whole lot of training per se. As I think of that today, in the onboarding process that I've gone through, or have made sure that my team goes through as they onboard here at West Point and in other institutions, it was really a lot about, I guess, apprenticing myself really to Bill. and
So
helping.
can I just ask, like, I think there was definitely a period and maybe even to this moment where kind of like all roads led to Bill or all roads led to
Oh
Jack
yeah.
in Boston development. And I was about a year into trying to start Evertrue, and one of my mentors had attended the Middlesex school, and he kind of helped connect me with the independent school league, and I got connected with the folks at Nobles and beyond.
Wow.
Early as we were getting started. And then we had lunch one day with Bill Boardman at the Somerset Club on Beacon Hill.
I know well, yeah.
And it
His
was,
farewell dinner from Harvard was at the Somerset.
and so I think he was retired from Harvard at that time, but was still just heavily involved throughout the community. And whenever his name comes up, I mean, people are just so kind of like, the amount of reverence and respect is just remarkable. Why is that? Like, what did Bill Boardman do?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Why is he one of the names that is just synonymous with philanthropy in,
Yeah.
at least?
Well, he's just a really lovely human being. Full stop. I think that that's really the secret sauce, is just that he was somebody who was genuine. I remember him, talking to me about how fortunate he felt to be in the field, and just what a privilege it was to get to know the people that were associated with Harvard, and that he felt like his work was just a real gift, and he never lost sight of that. It was never transactional, and that's I think one of the things that I really took away from my years. I was at Harvard for almost 8 years. At Harvard was, again, this really a genuine approach to working with people to try to connect them to something meaningful that they could facilitate at Harvard, as opposed to kind of by the numbers trying to put people through a whole system and pop them out the other side as donors. It was very much about an individual approach, a really authentic relationship that you would build over time with donors. That it was a privilege to represent an institution like Harvard, and that, again, Bill always would talk about being a facilitator, that it's really not about me. It's not about me, Bill Boardman, being in this role, and that when people give, it's because of me. It's that I'm here to offer this opportunity to make a difference to people that are well-intended and want to make an impact, and that I have the privilege of connecting them to an institution where that can happen. And so, again, this, for me, again, somebody who was really looking for some mission-driven, purposeful way to make a living, and something that could align with kind of my personal values. His philosophy really spoke to me, and I've kept that as a guiding principle, really, within all the teams that I've worked for. And it's the way that I approach fundraising, is that I feel like, again, it's not it's ultimately about how authentic you can be in your belief in the place that you're working, and your ability to express a real passion for it, and hopefully, again, find people that are like-minded, but that ultimately it's an opportunity that you're presenting, and people are going to say yes or no, and
Right.
that's okay. That's completely okay. I think that was something, that whole philosophy is something that I really took from Bill, and I think that made him very special.
So as you reflect on the yeses or the nos during that time at Harvard in particular, is there one yes or one no that stands out as being a really teachable moment or lesson that has stuck with you?
Well, there were, honestly, I worked with so many different people, and
Or even any just trip.
I guess I can offer, there was, and I'd rather not use the name.
No, please don't.
But,
yeah.
There was a very, very wealthy person at the time who was huge on Wall Street, making a lot of money, and ultimately got in trouble for the way in which he was doing that. And he did come to Harvard to talk about a way in which he could align. At the time, it was the biggest campaign, in the history of fundraising. It was a $2.1 billion campaign. I think it ended up at $4 billion or something. But it was, we definitely needed large donors, and we were looking at the time. Harvard had set up something called the Partners Program, so we were looking for non-grads to come to Harvard and invest in Harvard. There was Carrie Pelzel, who ended up at Dartmouth, was the head of it, and we were, hopeful that we could kind of create this collection of really high-powered people who were interested in topics that were possibly manifest at Harvard, whether in public health or in business, and that we could pull them in kind of topically. Anyway, the fellow that I'm talking about certainly had the capacity to make a transformational difference at Harvard. And there was discussion about what to do, given the fact that at the time, again, the goal that we had was really aspirational for Harvard and record breaking, for the industry. And ultimately, we decided as a development team that this person's reputation was just not in line with Harvard values, and that we did not want to see Harvard used as an institution to kind of cleanse somebody's reputation, and that we were willing to walk away. And so we didn't pursue that opportunity where it could have been immensely impactful at the time. And subsequently, I think that person may have ended up spending a little time in jail. Anyway, it was the right decision, and again, very much about protecting the reputation of the institution. I think institutions sometimes make mistakes, and we know that Harvard made a few, and that some it's been in the news. The kind of Jeffrey Epstein connection, that was very unfortunate. But for the most part, I think Harvard asked all the right questions and did its due diligence, and I really respected that. And all the institutions that I've worked at since then, I hold true to that. We want to be careful about where the money's coming from and who it's coming from. And it's particularly true at West Point. We have to be really do our due diligence on that front.
Well, it's a great example, and certainly topical. And oftentimes we'll hear about examples where the donor said no to the institution. We don't talk as much about when the institutions say no to the donors, right? The times that the institutions say yes to the donors that they shouldn't have, like those get the headlines, but there are more times than we realize where people are saying no, we won't accept that gift. And I don't think we can't really talk about those.
Yeah. And there were other times as well where, and I would say, here at West Point, there have been occasions where, again, people come forward who also have had similarly difficult trajectories in terms of their reputation, where we've also said no. We've also said no when it's just not a program that's within the wheelhouse for West Point, and that we know that we can't execute on a donor's aspiration in terms of a program or a passion, a personal passion, in a way that would make them happy. And so again, we will say no. Yes, I mean, again, my stories about working with people at Harvard, I mean, over and over and over again, and I would say just in my career at MoMA, at the New School, at West Point, I'm just endlessly I do feel just the same way that Bill kind of helped condition me. I just feel like I'm so lucky to have a place at the table, to be able to interact with people who have the capacity to make a difference and to create that intersection. And again, I think about development and that, advancement as a partnership, and that I'm able to facilitate that is just it's a privilege.
Tell me about MoMA, and most of your career within development has been centered in higher education. What is one thing that is similar about fundraising at MoMA, and what is one thing that is drastically different than the higher education world?
Well, again, museums are teaching institutions fundamentally, but you don't have, again, the alumni base. You need to cultivate a group of people who are going to support the institution. And I guess, you have it, obviously, museums are membership driven. And that's kind of the broad base, is the membership. But at the highest levels, it's in some ways it's a more limited group that you have to choose from. People who are interested in collecting, who have the capacity to collect at the highest levels, who are able to invest in these museums at the highest levels. And it does really rely, not unlike most not-for-profits, but on a smaller group of, I would say, more elite individuals who are willing and able to provide this incredible opportunity for the public to learn about art and build those museums. I really missed in that context, although there was public programming and an educational component, I did miss the students. I missed this idea that I was helping the next generation in a really tangible way, a way that, I had an opportunity to interact with the students. I could see the impact right away. I could watch a student over a 4-year period develop and see how the philanthropy was really making a difference to that individual. And in that regard, I guess, that was the difference. All of the individuals attached to these not-for-profits are remarkable, in that they're, as donors, that they're making something pretty magnificent happen. But I did like that whole educational process. And my father was a college president. He was the head of Babson College. So I grew up in an academic institution. My father was also a Harvard Business School professor. So I had been around academia, for a lot of my life. I just felt more comfortable. I just understood it better, and felt like I could really align with every aspect of what the educational world was offering to the students.
Well, I'm glad you shared that part of the story. I mean, that makes me feel like even prior to junior year of high school, you had plenty of exposure to the world of alumni and development.
Indeed, my parents entertained quite a lot at our house. And they were, again, my father was pretty catalytic early on in helping Babson find its niche as an entrepreneurial school. And, there was a fair amount of fundraising involved in that. And so while I was not, I wasn't overtly training at his knee, but I definitely watched how that worked. And he was really good at it too, but not, again, in a transactional way. It was always because he was just so passionate about what he was doing. And he was so engaged with bringing people into the endeavor. And again, I had so much respect for him, still do, for what he was able to create there.
Very cool. Tell me about the time at the New School, which is sort of the intersection of art and education to a certain extent.
Indeed, that's a really good observation. As you know, the New School has a number of conservatories. It has Parsons School of Design. It is, a very unique institution in New York. I think uniquely New York institution. So again, that kind of artistic bent, but also the social sciences in terms of academia and sort of very progressive in its perspective on education. Well, that experience was really remarkable as well. I worked with Bob Kerrey, who was the former senator from Nebraska, who was the president at the time. He did not have a lot of experience in higher education and was pretty ambitious for the school, definitely marching to a different drummer. extremely charismatic, and again, created a lot of sizzle around the school and kind of energized a generation of people who had been longstanding supporters of the institution. I don't know if you're familiar with the history, but the new school started as a continuing ed school, kind of an experiment in adult education. I don't think they saw it that way, but it was an outgrowth and kind of a political protest that a number of Columbia professors made during wartime, where they felt that they should be able to speak out against the war effort. And when they were silenced at Columbia, they decided to split off and start a new school. So that was the history. And then it really got some momentum around World War II, when a number of Jewish intellectuals and intellectuals across Europe were being discriminated against, and their lives were being threatened. And the new school really bravely reached out and accepted, I think there were 60 faculty members that they brought on from Europe, and they started the New School for Social Research. So they basically started with continuing ed and then a graduate school. Really unusual. So without that college in the middle, which ended up being Eugene Lang School. So in any event, it was definitely, some of the traditional methods that I learned, some of the best practices. You had to kind of throw everything out the window and figure out how to do good fundraising in an environment where you did not have this longstanding tradition of giving back from the alumni. And you also had an alumni body that many of them were going into the arts or into theater, into fashion, and were not necessarily well-heeled in terms of their capacity to give back. So again, we had to come up with different ways of approaching fundraising. And it really was more like, I'd say, a cultural institution, in the sense a little bit more like an art institution, where you're trying to create the constituency. Because while we did finally build an alumni program there, we knew that was going to be a long-term investment for that to pay off. So again, it was a real exercise in being innovative, creative, and again, kind of iconoclastic. So right. We did end up raising a lot of money for a new building that is the University Center in downtown Manhattan, in the Village. It's quite iconic.
But to go from, and I was thinking about this before we started this conversation, but to go from a place where you're trying to create culture, camaraderie, some sense of obligation and commitment, to then the place that like maybe has that the most inherently ingrained in all of the world, that is quite a change. Like, not a lot of people are going from the new school to West Point. It's opposite ends of the spectrum.
It is. And also just in terms of, kind of political perspective, that is, I'd say that West Point certainly represents every perspective that you can imagine, but it does tend to be slightly more traditional and a little more conservative. But, both of the institutions are graduating people who are hoping to make a really important impact and to serve in some meaningful way in the world. So, and that, I would say, again, across higher education, that was the thing that I loved the most, was that it was, you're investing in this, in the next generation that will make, kind of a, if you can do that, then just imagine all of the possibilities that come out of that. So, while West Point is all about service, I also felt that the new school grads were profoundly committed to, whether they were actors or musicians or fashion designers, they were profoundly committed to making a difference in their communities.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And it sounds like even though maybe the missions and histories are radically different, you genuinely believe deeply in both of them.
Indeed, indeed. And I think you can't do this work authentically unless you really believe in the missions. And I will say that I was recruited to the job at West Point twice. So I was working at the new school. I was commuting into the city. I live in Garrison, New York, which is about an hour north on the train. And it was about a 2-hour door-to-door commute to get into Manhattan to the new school. I had small kids, and I was hoping that something would emerge that would allow me to be a little more present for my children. And West Point did come around and knock and said, you know, you've got the fundraising skills, and we're really looking to up our game. And this is your professional background, and we'd love to have you join us. And I will say, the first time around, I did feel like it was a bridge too far. After a number of interviews, and I was driving off post, and there was a cadre of cadets doing hand-to-hand combat in uniform, you know, on the plane. And I just thought, I don't know if I can really identify with this. And then they came back, and so I pulled myself out of that first search. And then a couple of years later, they came back and asked me to look at it again. And at that point, I realized that I was the one who was limiting my understanding of what West Point was, because they understood who I was. They knew what my background was. They knew where I'd worked, and really what my, possible leanings might be. But they respected my skill set, and they wanted to bring that to West Point and to try to professionalize their fundraising operation. And at that point, I realized that, you know, I needed to open up my horizon. And it's been an amazing experience just working with some extraordinary people. And again, I have just deep respect for what West Point is trying to do with military leaders in terms of teaching critical thinking. It is a liberal arts institution. That's the thing that a lot of people don't know, is that it is liberal arts. And there are core requirements that include studying English and poetry and Shakespeare, you know, as well as the history of warfare, etc. So, and obviously getting the military training that graduates have in order to go become second lieutenants in the Army. But I love that these people are being taught to think really critically, and that ultimately what I've come to understand is that everybody is asked to bring their best game forward, to bring whatever they're thinking to the commander and offer that as part of the problem solving. And ultimately, yes, the commander makes the decision, but it is a real process of collecting all the information and trying to come up with the best possible solution given the facts, or given, you know, people's perspectives. And that was something that I didn't expect, that it's not just rote learning.
And when you think about some of the most poignant memories or experiences that you've been a part of since joining West Point, it's been a period of, tremendous change. Certainly, I think you hinted at it earlier. Maybe some of what it had in common with the new school was this desire to really professionalize and elevate philanthropy, recognizing that even the funding model has maybe changed over time. And so, when you think about the work there, specific events or specific experiences where you've just really felt that just inspiration of the mission, or that you've really felt like you're seeing philanthropy in action?
Well, all the time, every day. I mean, what we do at West Point, I mean, many people still, when I run into them and I say I'm the VP of development at West Point, they'll say West Point needs money, because it is an institution that is primarily funded with appropriated dollars. And those appropriated dollars are core and essential to West Point being able to execute on its mission. So without those appropriated dollars, which come from taxpayers, so all of us are part of supporting West Point already as taxpayers, that education would exist without philanthropy, but it would not be the top tier educational experience that it is without donors. So we raise money for what we term the margin of excellence, which makes the difference between being a solid institution and being an excellent institution that, you know, regularly produces MacArthur scholars and Fulbright winners, and we do extremely well, you know, in terms of being toe-to-toe with top-tier institutions on that count, with these very competitive graduate scholarships. We have opportunities that really allow the cadets to develop as people, both inside and outside of the classroom, but also as leaders. And we enhance with our margin of excellence dollars the facilities even at West Point. So there's often a public-private kind of combo going on where the appropriated dollars will be building the fundamental structure and will be ensuring that the facility ends up being competitive with facilities across the country at the best institutions.
Tell me about the Frederick Malek West Point Visitor Center. I think that is an example, and I know that you personally spent a lot of time making that happen.
Yeah, well, thanks. You know, again, Fred Malek, amazing man. Really just cannot say enough good things about him. Sadly, he is deceased. But he and his wife, Marlene Malek, who, by the way, is being honored shortly at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. for her work alongside Fred, but also in her own right, philanthropically. So really remarkable couple. But you know, that was a really interesting journey with Fred. He was the class of 1959. He had an incredible network of friends and acquaintances that he was willing to bring to West Point, introduce them to the academy, help them fall in love again, and with the non-grad donors who we have at West Point, it has been the case that it has been aligned with a really passionate alum. And the friendship between those individuals is what brings those non-grads into our family. But he, time and time again, would open up his Rolodex and you know, think about West Point as a place that completely transformed his life. His father was he was from Czechoslovakia, and his father had been a beer truck driver. And Fred ended up, through, you know, his own wiles and determination, having a remarkable career, and again, was all about West Point. The visitor center was something that, you know, just was a wonderful evolution for him. So he was always interested in doing something for cadets. He wanted to do something on West Point, the Post. He ended up touching a lot of different dimensions of West Point. A number of athletic facilities. He was involved supporting the superintendent. Anyway, kind of a citizen of the academy with respect to his philanthropy. But when we were looking for funding for the biggest building ever that we've built, which was the visitor center, which is outside of West Point's gates, and not a a place that had been meaningful to him, he really hesitated. And he hesitated for a long time. Meanwhile, he was the chairman of our first campaign when I arrived here, which was called For Us All. And again, it was that process of educating Fred, as we were educating others about the importance of the visitor center, the fact that 1 million people visited West Point through that portal, that it was critical and essential to the civilian and creating a better relationship between the civilian and military worlds, and that was an important intersection. And over a period of years, I think it took maybe 4 years, Fred warmed to it, and then ultimately made one of the largest gifts to that campaign to name the what is now the Malek West Point Visitor Center. And it was such a beautiful thing to watch happen. And it was the right thing for Fred to do. And it turned out to be a perfect way for him to express, again, because he had been this person that was kind of bringing in people from outside of West Point, that the visitor center was named for him was just, it couldn't have been more appropriate. But it took him a while, and just being part of that journey with him was very memorable, and again, just such a privilege to work with him. So
very cool story, and such a specific example. When you think about the general changes that you've seen during your tenure at West Point, what is a little bit of the before and present, and then where do you want things to go in the coming 3-5 years? What are you all excited about?
Okay, well, when I first got to West Point, I think they were bringing in something like $28 million a year, and last year we brought in close to 80 million. So it's been transformed just in terms of a culture of philanthropy, and the difference, and it does take time. I've been here now 14 years, but to raise people's sights, to get them vested in this margin of excellence concept. And the thing about West Point is that really fundraising didn't start here in earnest until really the very late 90s. So we were definitely still in our, I would say, early adolescence when I got here, and now have matured to a point where, again, the dollars speak for themselves. We also have had massive success. While the rest of the industry has seen a decline in alumni participation, we have almost year over year seen an increase. So I think, again, maybe it might even be in the same neighborhood, like 29% alumni participation when I got here, and it's now closer to 37. And again, just the fact that we were able to do that by just continuing to execute on best practices, as you say, in a very rich environment with people who are very connected to the institution, but who just were not accustomed to thinking of philanthropy as a way of sustaining it.
So what do you think is the most important factor in somebody going from maybe not an active no, but just a passive non-participation to yes? Like, what is it that you have done clearly thousands of times to get people off the sidelines into that culture of philanthropy?
A lot of education. And also I would say we have done a really great job. My colleague, Terrence Sinkfield, is the current head of alumni support, but we've really approached our alumni relations program as kind of the continuum. And this is something that I really believed in, is that you've got to make sure that this institution is still meaningful to grads, not just in terms of giving back philanthropically, but are you actually traveling with the alumni through moments that matter through their lifetime? And we do that. So we've done human-centered design studies. Again, we've worked with our alums to figure out when we need to be there as an alumni association, so that it's not just the wonderful recollection of what might have happened at West Point to transform somebody's life, as Fred feels, and Fred Malek felt, and many graduates do. But it's also that the Alumni Association is really providing some value to the alums beyond just hosting for reunions. So, are we helping them with career transitions when they're leaving the military? Are we helping them when their spouses die? Are we helping them when they are moving to a new community network with other alumni? Are we ensuring that they are well informed about what's happening at the academy? And continuing to build that association and real connectivity in a meaningful way. So, and pertinent to them as they move through their lives. We have a program now, and these are things that have come online since I joined, but something called Gripping Hands. So if people are experiencing financial difficulty, that we've raised money to be able to help people in need, during natural disasters in various parts of the country. So that sort of actually truly caring about the community and ensuring that people feel that it's not just about the money, that it's about the community, that it's about being part of the West Point family, and this whole notion of gripping hands with the long gray line. That is really, really important thing through generations. And again, promoting that and making that manifest.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. Congratulations on the momentum, approaching $1 billion raised since you've joined.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we are in a new campaign. It's a big campaign for West Point. It's $600 million, and it's called West Point Ready. And we're about 2.5 years in, I guess now, and we're about 50% of the way there. So we're feeling pretty good about that. But we've got some work to do to get to sprint to the finish, and that's still a number of years off. So.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about where you are. I know we're sort of at time now. Thank you for carving out a little extra time here. But what is the state of the team today? Are you hiring at all? If folks want to learn more, how can they stay in touch with you? And
that's fantastic. We do have openings. The team has grown significantly. I would say, to anybody that's been a professional fundraiser, if you came into our organization, you'd recognize it. We're a team of about 67 people. It's a comprehensive development operation that includes actually all the athletic fundraisers as well. So it's really a very collaborative team. That is definitely a hallmark of what I attempt to do anyway as a leader of development teams. I'm really committed to developing people and to seeing them grow and flourish, and giving them a lot of autonomy with some guidance and ongoing dialogue. But I love to see people be successful at what they do. And definitely, if people are interested in doing professional fundraising at an institution with a very meaningful mission in a beautiful part of the world, please look at us. Because it's not, what people think when they think about a service academy kind of initially. It is, I think, very recognizable. And just going back to one of the things that you talked about earlier, Brent, Kenyon College, where I graduated from, one of the questions that you asked me before this interview is, who do you look at for good fundraising? And I always look at Kenyon, where again, I feel this such an affinity for that place. And I just want to give you a shout out, because I understand that you work with Kenyon. I didn't know that until now, but I just think their campaigns again around touching people's hearts and making sure that you're bringing back the things that really were special about the institution. I think you all are doing a great job. So I just want to thank you, and you've worked with our team a little as well, and I want to thank you for the insights that you've brought too. So
do you know Colleen Garland at Kenyon by any chance?
we've kind of circled each other, but we haven't had a meaningful conversation. I should reach
Well,
out.
I'm saying it here publicly to all of our listeners that I will certainly shoot her a note and share your positive sentiments, and hope that I can connect you all for a direct conversation, given all the shared interests, experiences, affinities. And thank you so much, Kristin, for sharing more about your journey. And it's just it's so fun to hear the paths and the twists and turns, and taking us over to Spain and back was fun. And I wish you all continued success as you advance that incredible institution and mission. And we're grateful to be on that journey with you. And so I would encourage everybody, reach out to Kristin. She's on LinkedIn, find her, let her know that you heard her on the podcast. And we look forward to being in touch. Kristin, any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
A lot of fun. All right. Appreciate it. Well, with that, everybody, I'm going to close today's episode with Kristin Sorenson, who serves as Vice President of Development at the West Point Association of Graduates.
Thank you, Brent.